At my family's table, they saw nothing. The disappointment. They laughed about my tiny apartment, my simple life, while I was quietly buying their city, block by block, building my empire. They think I'm the family failure, but what happens when I'm the only one who holds the keys? To save them or let them fall? The secret I've guarded for years is about to change everything. To the outside world, and particularly to my esteemed family, my life in Portland is a quiet tapestry woven with threads of perceived mediocrity. I live in a modest duplex on Alder Street, a building with a certain vintage charm that they, of course, would only describe as dated or more likely cramped. My days are supposedly filled with the mundane ballet of a junior real estate agent, showing affordable, sometimes a little worn, walk-up apartments to earnest grad students or young couples just starting out. They picture me meticulously calculating commission checks, forever on the verge of just scraping by. A narrative that seems to provide them a peculiar sort of comfort, a benchmark against which their own dazzling successes can shine even brighter. The serenity they perceive in my days, however, hides a depth of calculation and a breadth of ambition they couldn't begin to fathom. Does the quiet strength I've had to cultivate in the face of their assumptions remind you of any extraordinary, underestimated women in your own life? I'd genuinely love to hear about them in the comments below. Perhaps we all know a Nora. The monthly Ashcraft family dinners, held in the sprawling, ostentatious Napa Valley estate that screams new money, despite their claims of old-world lineage, are less about familial bonding and more about competitive financial declarations. I usually find a seat near the fireplace, a glass of iced tea my only shield, and observe. It's a performance, really. Cousin Preston, all drawling, arrogance and a freshly acquired Jackson Hole ranch, right next to the guy who owns half of Silicon Valley, as he'd put it. Cassandra, his sister, never to be outdone, would flourish a designer clutch and speak of their new Tuscan vineyard with private access to the Med, a view so exclusive she'd sigh, "You can't even put a price on that." I've learned to hide my smiles, my amusement behind my glass. If only they knew the real price of things, the real value. They see Nora Hale, the quiet cousin, the one who chose her path, as Aunt Evelyn so delicately phrases it. Her tone dripping with the unspoken disappointment that my path didn't involve a hedge fund manager, or at least a lucrative lifestyle. Blog, the underachiever who, at 35, is still, in their eyes, renting and hasn't quite managed to grow up and buy something real. That Alder Street duplex, the one Cassandra feigned such surprise over, didn't know people our age still rented, is a particular point of their condescending fascination. It's almost a caricature they've painted. Nora in her sensible shoes, probably eating instant noodles to save for a down payment she'll never afford. What they don't see are the late nights, not spent worrying over bills, but over acquisition strategies, poring over zoning laws, and leading negotiations for multi-million-dollar commercial properties. They don't see the intricate web of West Pine Holdings, the anonymous firm I built from the ground up over the last decade, a firm that has been methodically, ethically, and very quietly snapping up significant commercial and residential real estate across the Pacific Northwest. The irony is almost too rich to bear. The Alder Street complex they so casually dismiss was, in fact, my company's very first commercial acquisition. I'm not just a tenant there, I'm the owner. Their struggling Nora is, in reality, their landlord, a detail I've savored with a quiet, internal satisfaction. My father, bless his heart, usually tries to play peacemaker, though his attempts are often weak, lost in the cacophony of his siblings and nephews boasting. Now, Preston," he might murmur. "Not everyone's blessed with your sharp instincts. Nora chose her path." It's a dismissal disguised as defense, a way of closing the chapter on my perceived lack of ambition so they can return to more glittering topics. He too believes I'm just treading water. He sees the thrifted cardigans and scuffed boots, not the carefully cultivated anonymity or the balance sheets that could buy their entire estate 10 times over. The beauty of their assumptions is the freedom it grants me. While they're busy peacocking, I'm building. While they're focused on appearances, I'm focused on assets. They think my world is small, confined to those rent-controlled studios Cassandra imagines I spend my days showing. They have no concept of the scale, the sheer audacity of what I've been constructing in plain sight, hidden only by their own willful blindness and their narrow definition of success. They are so caught up in the glittering surface that they never bother to look at the solid foundations being laid right beneath their feet. My apartment on Alder Street isn't just a property, it's a statement, though one only I understand for now. It's brick, with vintage detailing, and home to families who've lived there for decades, protected by rent controls I fiercely uphold. It represents everything West Pine Holdings stands for: ethical growth, tenant-first investing, and historical preservation. The absolute antithesis of my cousin's flashy community bulldozing developments built for clout rather than for people. I like the space. I always tell them evenly when they ask, and it's true. It's real. So, I continue to play my part, the quiet observer, the slightly pitiable relative. I listen to their plans, their acquisitions, their thinly veiled criticisms of my small life. Little do they know, the ground beneath their feet, including the very Ashcraft Plaza where these grand dinners are held, is slowly, surely, shifting. And the architect of that shift is the one they least suspect, the one they so carelessly wrote off. The game has been long, but the pieces are almost all in place. The conversation at these family gatherings inevitably, and often with a gleam, of something close to schadenfreude turns to real estate on a grander scale. Deals they assume are so far beyond my league, I wouldn't even comprehend the terminology. Just last month, Cassandra, her eyes sparkling with a fresh piece of gossip, leaned in. "Speaking of real estate," she'd interjected, cutting someone off. "Have you heard about that situation on Alder Street? Some big firm bought the entire block. They're going to knock it all down, apparently." She'd added a little moo of mock pity. "Guess that little apartment of yours will finally go, Nora. Where will you move then?" I merely raised an eyebrow, feigning mild, distant interest. "Really?" I'd asked. Hadn't heard. The dramatic irony was a constant, silent companion. I was the buyer, and I had absolutely no intention of tearing anything down. The Alder Street complex was a hidden gem, and I was already deep into plans for a historically respectful renovation, preserving the brick facades and protecting the families who'd lived there for generations. Preston, of course, couldn't resist a jab. "Well, of course not," he smirked, swirling his wine. "Deals that size are way out of your league, cuz." Aunt Evelyn, ever practical in her condescension, chimed in brightly. "If you get booted, sweetie, you can always move back into the guest house here. We'll help you find something more respectable. Maybe even someone respectable." The implication was clear. My current life, my current self, was neither. I just smiled faintly. "I'm happy," I said flatly, "and so is my landlord." Cassandra gave a tight, disbelieving laugh. "You can't live a small life forever, dear." The Hale name used to mean something in this state. Oh, it still did, I thought. Just not in the way they understood. In the circles that mattered to me, in the world of ethical development and long-term community investment, West Pine Holdings was rapidly becoming synonymous with a new kind of legacy. The true catalyst for the coming storm, however, arrived. Not via Alder Street gossip, but through my father. He'd been quieter than usual, even for him, throughout the latest dinner. Finally, setting down his wineglass with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of genuine concern, he announced, "Actually, this meeting's partly about business. The board's worried about the new owner of Ashcraft Plaza." I tilted my head, maintaining my mask of polite, if slightly detached curiosity. "West Pine Holdings bought a majority stake 6 months ago," he continued, his brow furrowed. "No one knows who they are. Possibly a foreign investor, some speculate." Preston nodded sagely, eager to contribute to a problem of this magnitude. "Has to be. These faceless tycoons love legacy properties for the prestige. If only they knew their feared mystery investor was sitting right there in a thrifted cardigan and scuffed boots, carefully dissecting every word." My father then dropped the real bombshell, the one that sent a subtle, almost imperceptible tremor through the room, a tightening around Preston's mouth, a flicker in Cassandra's eyes. "And now," Dad continued, his voice grave, "they're asking tough questions, especially about our accounting practices." I could almost hear the silent gulp from across the table. Creative accounting, as they like to call it. The kind of creative accounting that allowed Preston to borrow substantially from the building's capital improvement fund to finance his Jackson Hole retreat, or how Cassandra managed to label her extravagant collection of luxury handbags as client engagement expenses for her nebulous interior design consultancy that rarely seemed to engage actual, paying clients. The air suddenly felt a little thicker, the expensive wine a little less palatable. Aunt Evelyn, her ever-present, pearls seeming to twitch with a newfound unease, tried to wave it away. "I am sure it's nothing serious, dear," she said, a little too brightly. "The Hale name still means something. People respect us." But my father, for once, didn't back down. "That's just it, Evelyn," he cut in, his voice firm. "This West Pine person, or whoever is behind it, doesn't seem impressed by names. They've ordered a full audit." An audit. The word hung in the air like a guillotine's shadow. I watched the carefully constructed masks begin to crack, panic tightly veiled behind designer smiles and feigned nonchalance. An audit wouldn't just uncover questionable expenses, it would lay bare the entire fragile edifice of their financial mismanagement, the nepotism, the self-dealing that had been siphoning funds from the Ashcraft Plaza for years. Suddenly, all eyes turned to me. It was Cassandra, her voice suddenly sugary, almost desperate. "Maybe Nora could help," she said, a brilliant false smile plastered on her face. "She works in real estate, doesn't she? Maybe she knows someone at the management company, someone who could smooth things over?" Just like that, I was no longer the embarrassing, underachieving poor relation. I was potentially useful. The speed of their pivot was almost dizzying. I allowed a small, non-committal smile to play on my lips. The web was drawing tighter, and they were walking right into its center, seeking help from the very architect of their impending reckoning. I let the silence stretch for a moment, enjoying the sudden, focused attention, the desperate hope in their eyes. "I mostly work with smaller residential clients," I said smoothly, my voice deliberately modest. "Nothing on the scale of Ashcraft Plaza, I'm afraid." The disappointment on their faces was immediate and palpable. Preston practically snapped, his composure finally cracking. "For God's sake, Nora, can't you even try to help your own family?" His mother shot him a warning glance, but her own silence, her own averted gaze said enough. Even Dad was back to swirling his wine, his brief moment of concern for the family business apparently not extending to defending his underachieving daughter from his nephew's outburst. They had absolutely no idea how helpful I was about to be, just not in the way they hoped. Tomorrow morning, West Pine Holdings would release a public statement. Effective immediately, Ashcraft Plaza would undergo major operational and financial reforms. No more shadow budgets, no more inflated, nepotistic contracts, no more treating the building's accounts like a personal family credit card. I glanced around the opulent penthouse, at the artwork clearly bought with diverted maintenance funds, the custom couches listed at triple their actual price, the garish fixtures installed by Cassandra's husband's firm through bloated, unquestioned invoices. Their world, built on a foundation of entitlement and deceit, was about to be thoroughly and very publicly audited. But the most delicious chapter of this saga, the one where the veil is truly lifted, was still carefully under wraps, waiting for the perfect moment to unfold. Continue watching to witness the full, unvarnished truth behind a decade of silence and strategic patience. Rising from my seat near the fireplace, I brushed off my simple jeans, the worn denim a stark contrast to the silks and cashmeres adorning my relatives. "Anyway," I said, my voice calm and even, "some of us have early mornings." Cassandra couldn't resist a final parting smirk. "Off to show more charmingly dilapidated rent-controlled studios, are we, Nora?" I just smiled, slinging my worn leather satchel over my shoulder. Inside that bag, nestled amongst my everyday items, were the board briefing documents, the initial legal filings, and the comprehensive renovation proposals for Ashcraft Plaza, papers collectively worth more than every piece of designer clothing, and ostentatious jewelry in that entire room. As I reached the ornate doorway, Aunt Evelyn called out, her voice saccharine, "Next time, Nora dear, perhaps try to dress a little more like a Hale. Appearances do matter, you know." I paused, a genuine smile finally touching my lips. "Don't worry, Aunt Evelyn," I replied, my voice carrying a new, almost imperceptible edge. "Tomorrow, I assure you, I'll look exactly like they expect a Hale to look." They just didn't realize I was already the one pulling the strings, running the entire show from behind a curtain of their own making. The next morning, the city of Portland unfolded beneath my real office window. An entire penthouse floor in one of the newest, most architecturally significant buildings downtown, a testament to West Pine Holdings' success. Gone were the thrifted cardigans and scuffed boots. Today I wore a bespoke Altuzarra suit in a deep, commanding navy. Its lines were sharp, exuding a quiet strength, the kind of impeccably tailored look Aunt Evelyn always fantasized I'd wear to impress a potential wealthy husband. The irony wasn't lost on me. Instead, I was wearing it to dismantle their carefully constructed house of cards. My assistant, Ela, a whirlwind of efficiency and sharp intellect, walked in, placing a perfectly made cappuccino beside my laptop. "The Ashcraft Plaza board is already seated," she informed me briskly. "Your family got here unusually early, trying to charm the independent members, I imagine." I allowed myself a small, wry smirk, picturing Preston and Cassandra desperately working the room, their usual arrogance likely replaced by a strained, unconvincing affability. "Audit packets all printed and distributed," Ila continued. "The forensic accounting team uncovered even more than we initially projected. Their practices were creatively bold, to put it mildly." She paused, her gaze meeting mine, a hint of concern in her usually unflappable demeanor. "Are you absolutely sure you want to go through with this, Nora? Once they know it's you, there's no turning back. This will change everything with your family." I looked out at the city. My city. Built on principles they'd long since discarded. "They need to learn, Ila," I said quietly, my voice firm. "Legacy isn't a license to abuse power or trust. It's a responsibility." I turned from the window, catching my reflection in the polished glass, a woman they wouldn't recognize, woman I had painstakingly become in the shadows of their disregard. The official ownership announcement, confirming your identity as CEO of West Pine goes live to the press in exactly 20 minutes, Ila added, glancing at her watch. Once that hits the wires, you'll be completely unmasked. A shiver of anticipation, not fear, ran down my spine. Then let's begin, I said, picking up my sleek leather briefcase, which now held not just documents, but the weight of a decade's worth of planning and silent resolve. The Ashcraft Plaza boardroom, usually a stage for my family's performative authority, hushed as I entered. My father, Aunt Evelyn, Preston, and Cassandra were clustered at the far end of the massive mahogany table, looking uncharacteristically unnerved, underdressed for the gravity of the situation, and visibly rattled by the presence of the stern-faced, independent board members and the West Pine Holdings transition team already seated. Preston, ever the first to bluster, barked out, "Who in the hell are you? This is a private meeting." His voice, usually so confident, held a distinct tremor. I calmly walked to the head of the table, the seat of power, and placed my briefcase, down with a soft, definitive click that seemed to echo in the sudden silence. I looked directly at them, my expression unreadable. "Good morning," I said, my voice clear and carrying easily across the room. "I'm Nora Hale." A flicker of confusion, then dawning disbelief crossed their faces. "Founder," I continued, letting each word land with precision, "and sole owner of West Pine Holdings, the company that now owns this building and several others. Your family has, shall we say, leveraged rather creatively and, I'm afraid, illegally." Aunt Evelyn turned a ghastly shade of white, her hand flying to her pearls as if to clutch them for support. Cassandra's lips parted, but no sound emerged, her carefully applied lipstick suddenly looking garish against her pale skin. My father's hand tightened on the pen he was holding, his knuckles white. "Nora?" he breathed, his voice barely a whisper, a mixture of shock and a dawning, horrifying comprehension in his eyes. I gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "Yes, Dad. Good morning." I opened my briefcase and began to slide copies of the forensic audit reports across the polished table towards each of them, a tangible representation of their exposed deceptions. "Shall we begin by reviewing your financials?" The carefully orchestrated silence of their lives, built on unspoken agreements and hidden transactions, was about to be shattered by the undeniable language of numbers. The moment I had meticulously planned for over a year had finally arrived. It's moments like these, when truth confronts illusion, that can redefine everything. If you believe in the power of quiet determination and fighting for what's right, even against the odds, consider subscribing to this channel. There are always more stories of resilience and principled stands to share. Preston, predictably, was the first to find his voice, sputtering, This is insane. You're just..." He trailed off, searching for the familiar dismissive labels. I met his gaze, unflinching. "Just what, Preston?" I asked quietly. "The black sheep? The renter? The woman in consignment clothes you all felt so comfortable pitying?" Cassandra blinked rapidly, as if trying to reconcile the Nora before her with the one she'd so easily mocked. But you show apartments," she stammered, the words sounding absurd even to her own ears in this context. "I work," I stated simply, letting the truth of that understatement resonate. "And while you were all busy curating illusions of wealth, I was building something real, something with integrity." The independent board members watched, stunned into silence, as the facade of the proud, untouchable Hale family began to visibly unravel, one damning page of the audit report at a time. I gestured to the thick folders before them. "These," I announced, my voice steady and devoid of triumph, only a cold, hard statement of fact, contained detailed, irrefutable documentation of every misused fund, every inflated invoice, every falsified receipt, and every instance of financial irregularity involving Ashcraft Plaza's accounts under your family's management. I began distributing the final, most damning set of documents, the ones detailing their personal enrichment at the plaza's expense. "Preston," I said, turning to him, "perhaps you'd care to explain to the board the $2 million in emergency roof repairs that coincidentally perfectly financed your new Jackson Hole property?" He flushed a violent, blotchy red, so hard and fast I thought he might genuinely pass out or have a stroke. His bravado had utterly evaporated, leaving behind only a terrified, cornered man. My gaze then shifted to Cassandra, who was now attempting to shrink into her expensive and likely unethically expensed designer chair. "Or, Cassandra," I continued, my voice relentlessly even as I flipped to the next damning section of the report, "maybe you'd like to walk us through your husband's construction firm's invoices? The ones charging Ashcraft Plaza 3 times the market rate for basic plumbing repairs, often for work that was, according to our engineers, either substandard or never actually completed." Her carefully constructed composure finally shattered. You'd air out your own family's dirty laundry like this in front of everyone?" Aunt Evelyn gasped, clutching her chest dramatically, her face a mask of outraged disbelief and dawning horror. "No, Aunt Evelyn," I corrected her calmly, my eyes meeting hers without a trace of malice, only a profound weariness. "You all aired it out yourselves, over years of reckless entitlement. I'm just finally making sure it gets properly cleaned." My father, who had been silent, his head bowed, finally spoke. His voice was low, strained, and pleading. "Nora, sweetheart, we can explain. There are nuances." I raised a hand, a small, decisive gesture that cut him off mid-sentence. "Don't," I said, my voice firm but not unkind. "Please, just don't. For years I've watched this family, our family, treat great-grandfather Hale's legacy, a legacy built on hard work, community, and genuine innovation, like a personal, inexhaustible ATM. All while you openly mocked my so-called humble life, my choices, my perceived lack of ambition. I let my gaze sweep over each of them. While you were busy judging and spending, I was busy building something better. Something founded on the values he actually stood for, not on vanity or superficial appearances." A dazed, almost childlike confusion crossed Cassandra's face. "But why?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Why pretend to be struggling all those years? Why not just tell us?" It was a question born of a lifetime of assuming wealth had to be flaunted to be real. "I didn't pretend anything," I replied, meeting her bewildered stare. "I lived modestly. I invested wisely. You were the ones who assumed that wealth had to be loud, ostentatious, and paraded for public consumption. You projected your own values onto my life and drew your own wildly inaccurate conclusions." Preston, still reeling, muttered, "The Alder Street building, you really live there?" He looked utterly stunned, as if this small personal detail was somehow more shocking than the multi-million-dollar deceptions. "I own it," I corrected him gently, "and most of the block. And no, Preston, contrary to Cassandra's gossip, I'm not demolishing it. Because some of us actually care about people, about communities, and about preserving history, not just about maximizing short-term returns at any cost." Suddenly, a symphony of buzzing phones erupted around the boardroom table. One of the independent board members looked up from his screen, his eyes wide with a new level of astonishment. He began to read aloud. "West Pine Holdings officially reveals CEO's identity. Nora Hale, a previously unknown member of the prominent Hale family, confirmed as sole owner of a $2 billion Pacific Northwest real estate portfolio. Another, board member, fumbling with her own phone, muttered, her voice tinged with awe, ranked among the nation's top ethical developers, specializes in historic preservation and tenant protection initiatives. Cassandra whispered, her face pale and drawn. This will ruin us. The scandal? No, Cassandra, I said firmly, my voice resonating with quiet authority. This will save you. From yourselves. Effective today, I announced, addressing the entire room, my gaze sweeping from my stunned family to the now intensely focused board members. Ashcraft Plaza will operate with complete transparency and under new management protocols. No more shell games with subsidiary accounts. No more sweetheart contracts awarded to unqualified friends and family. No more creative expense reports. I paused, letting the weight of my words sink in. Preston, attempting a last desperate show of bravado, though his voice trembled uncontrollably, blustered. And if we don't comply? What then? A small, almost sad smile touched my lips. Then, Preston, I said softly, I'll have no choice but to pass these meticulously detailed audit reports, along with all supporting documentation, directly to the relevant authorities. I'm quite certain the IRS, and perhaps even the SEC, would find them illuminating. An absolute, suffocating silence thickened the air in the boardroom. The only sound was the frantic, shallow breathing of my family members. My father finally looked up, his face etched with a mixture of despair, shame, and a dawning, reluctant respect. What do you want, Nora? He asked, his voice hoarse. What do you want from us? I met his eyes, and then those of Evelyn, Preston, and Cassandra, one by one. I want you to remember, I said, my voice filled with a quiet, profound conviction, what the hail name meant before all this. Before the greed, before the entitlement, before the belief that legacy was something to be spent rather than built upon. Great-grandfather Hale built communities, not just profit margins. He invested in people, not just properties. I stood, slowly gathering my papers, the weight of the moment settling upon me. You have a choice now, I stated, my tone even and devoid of accusation. You can work with me, with West Pine Holdings, to restore that legacy, to rebuild Ashcraft Plaza on a foundation of integrity and genuine value. Or, I paused, letting the alternative hang in the air. You can find somewhere else to live. I hear there are some lovely rentals available up in Lake Oswego these days. As I turned to leave, a new chapter dawning not just for Ashcraft Plaza, but for the entire Hale family, my father's voice, raw and broken, stopped me just as I reached the door. Nora, wait. I paused, my back still to him. I was wrong about you, Nora. So incredibly wrong. A heavy sigh escaped me, a breath I felt I'd been holding for more than a decade. Yes, Dad, I replied quietly without turning. You were. The journey to this point was long, filled with silent work and unwavering resolve. It's proof that true strength often builds in the quiet, away from the noise of doubt. If this story of quiet perseverance and eventual triumph resonates with you, please consider giving this video a like. It helps stories like these reach others who might need to hear them. My father joined me near the makeshift cocoa table, a steaming mug in his hand. He looked more relaxed, less burdened than I had seen him in years. You know, he said, his voice thoughtful as he surveyed the simple, joyful scene. Your great-grandfather, my grandfather, he always believed that buildings should shelter hearts, not just wallets. He used to say that the true measure of a structure was the happiness of the lives lived within its walls. I nodded, a lump forming in my throat. I found his old ledgers when I was researching the history of some of West Pine's first acquisitions, I told him. They were filled with handwritten notes, not just about finances, but about protecting tenants during hard times, about fostering a sense of community. He wrote about integrity as his most valuable asset. My father looked at me then, not as the daughter who had supposedly gone off track, not as the family enigma, but as someone who had unknowingly picked up a torch he and others had let fall. "We forgot that," he said softly, his gaze sweeping over the diverse, happy gathering. "Somewhere along the way, we forgot what truly mattered." He paused, then added, his voice thick with emotion, "You could have ruined us completely, Nora. Publicly, financially, every way imaginable." "That was never the point, Dad," I said quietly, my eyes drawn to a little girl twirling with uninhibited joy under the softly glowing fairy lights. "I just wanted to build something that would outlast me, something good. And sometimes, the greatest success isn't about proving them wrong. It's about offering them and yourself a better version of right. If you've ever felt underestimated, overlooked, or quietly counted out by those around you, then maybe you see a little of yourself in my story. I didn't set out on this journey with the primary goal of proving anyone wrong, though I admit there were moments when that thought provided a certain motivating spark. My deepest desire was simply to build something real, something tangible, something that couldn't be easily taken away or dismissed because it was rooted in genuine values, not in fleeting vanity or empty appearances. If my story, this journey, from the quiet corners to the boardroom, has moved you or resonated with your own experiences, I'd genuinely love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below. What would you have done in my shoes? What remarkable things have you built in silence while others doubted or simply weren't looking? Let's talk about it. Let's acknowledge and give each other credit for the quiet, often unseen work, the long nights, the tough choices that forge true strength and lasting success. And if you're facing a moment right now, perhaps one like I once did, when the world around you seems to expect very little from you, or worse, actively dismisses your potential, please don't feel you need to shout louder to be heard. Instead, focus on building stronger. You don't need anyone else's approval to begin your journey. What you truly need is a clear purpose and unwavering consistency. The rest, the recognition, the success, it will come, often when and how you least expect it. Please support this ongoing journey of sharing stories about resilience, redemption, and the power of redefining success on your own terms by subscribing to the channel. There are so many more narratives waiting to be told, more lessons to be learned, more inspiration to be found together. Because ultimately, legacy isn't just about what you inherit. It's about what you consciously choose to create, what you build with your own hands, your own heart, and your own principles. And sometimes the most powerful and enduring form of revenge isn't revenge at all. It's simply becoming, quietly, and steadfastly, exactly who they said you couldn't be. And in doing so, perhaps even inspiring them to become better versions of themselves. So, subscribe, stay with me, and let's continue to explore what it means to build something that truly lasts. Something that matters, something that changes the world, even if it's just our own small corner of it, for the better.